for like about 20 minutes or half an hour, and then leave the rest of the questions. Let me know when to start.
Yeah, I will make a short introduction and
Sure.
then because let's see. Let's see. Here we have some. What about Klaipėda? I don't see anyone from Klaipėda, and I know that they should be connected. Do we have them online? Let's check.
And while it's happening, I don't have everybody's name yet. I just met you earlier upstairs. I met you very briefly as well, right? Brian?
Yeah, yoga. Nice to meet you.
Yoga?
Yoga, yeah.
Cool. And what's your name?
Yava.
Yava? Nice to meet you.
Jurate.
Yurata? Everybody starts with a Y.
And it's the same, Jurate.
Now this is gonna get very confusing. What's your name?
Diana.
Diana? That one's easier.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Raimondas.
Raimondas, okay, and what was your name?
Davile.
Davila. And hi, what was your name back there?
My name is Vitalis.
I'm sorry?
Vitalis.
Vitalis?
I'm Martina.
Markina? Cool, I'm Brian. So great to meet you guys.
Yeah. Hello, Brian.
And that's Manesh over there.
Hello.
Good to meet you. And Damon does, he's our video recorder. So his
How are
name
you?
is Diamond.
Oh, really? Cool. That's a good name. It's a strong
That's a good
name.
name. Yeah. Good. So we have some persons online. I just missed Klaipėda a little bit, like, but they have a connection, so probably maybe they will be joining later. So.
Gal ir jiem paskambint?
Gal aš pasveikinsiu, kai prasidės. You can sit here.
I think
There's a free place.
Did the other gentleman leave? Okay, I'm Brian.
I'm Yeva.
Yeah, the other gentleman was sitting there, but
Oh, Samson.
I'm not sure if he's coming back.
Okay, I will leave Samson near my.
Samson.
near
Samsono vietoj.
my- That's my fault, so I have a reservation. For the better place. Well, okay, so if you're standing here, I will make a short introduction.
Jeigu mokėtum.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody, those who came here live and for those who are joining us online, maybe somebody will join later. So I'm very glad to host today a very special person, Brian Talibi, whom I know from like 2019. We met in Copenhagen, then we spent some time in Silicon Valley, NASA. So we learned together, we lived together in that space and enjoyed that time. So Brian was here once in Lithuania, and he was working on the brilliant idea about the disruption of education with the use of AI. Artificial intelligence. So since then, since his last visit, there's a lot of new things come up, and he made a lot of new good things in the platform and also by himself. So he is a world-renowned speaker. He is inventor of education disruption. So he's a businessman and has a very interesting and profound story of himself. So I believe he will share this with you, but it's a great privilege and honor to have him here because he came just from Economic Forum in Davos. He delivered some 5 speeches there. Yeah, so, and today also, he just came here. It seemed that only for us, but I just get aware yesterday that he already invited to one very important event with participation of the Economic Ministry of Economy in Lithuania about cryptocurrencies, Web3, and a lot of different things which I don't have any clue about, but he's an expert in all those things which are so much, making a big progress in our lives. And as being education institution, we of course need to be aware of what's happening in the tech world and how this, education area can be adjusted or improved by some technological innovations. So we need to be aware about this and to see what possibilities these innovations can bring to education. So we could become one of the satellites of this brilliant idea, which Brian creates and brings to the world. And maybe in Baltics and Eastern Europe, we could become those pioneers of these innovations. So thank you, Brian, for coming here. And we have you first, and then you will come to our meeting.
Absolutely.
So it seems some kind of a priority, and we are very grateful for you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the floor is yours.
Thank you.
He has slides and
Well,
himself.
I'm
so
absolutely
goodbye.
honored to be here. Gabia, thank you so much for such a fantastic introduction. She's after when I realized I'm going to be speaking again at the World Economic Forum. We figured I'd pop over here immediately afterwards. After here, I'm heading out to Italy to meet with the World Summit of Nobel Laureates to do something with them and just kind of bouncing all over the world. So it's quite fun. Now, this isn't working. Do we have do I need to point it to a particular place to?
Yeah.
Can you take care of this while I start introducing myself?
Mhm.
So as Gabia mentioned, we actually met at the Singularity University Global Startup Program, where we work with some of the other leaders in technology to look at how we can use emerging technology to radically transform industries. Now, prior to that, I had already been working on this project, and I think we both learned quite a bit there. But if it's okay with you guys, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my history first, and then we'll talk about the world of education and the disruptions that are happening due to emerging technology. And then I'll tell you a little bit about Ahura AI and our project. And then I'll leave a whole bunch of time afterwards for questions so we can just have an open dialogue. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
Awesome. So if somebody, can you just hit the next button? So I was born in a tiny village with no running water and no electricity out in the southeastern desert of Iran. I should click to the next one. So I was really fortunate because, and this is a tiny village out in like close to Pakistan. And it was actually kind of wild. I went back many years ago and a lot of the people that I grew up with still believed that the earth is in the center of the universe. And I had to have a 3-hour conversation with them about why the earth isn't flat. But so I was really fortunate because the government of Iran, the Ayatollah at the time, wanted to execute my whole family. So as a result, we escaped across the border into Turkey and lived in a refugee camp for a couple of years. We were again really fortunate. We got our political asylum and came to the United States. And the reason I said I was so lucky is because suddenly I had access to the American education system, I had access to opportunity. And as they say, people much smarter than me, that capability and intelligence is evenly distributed across the world, but access to opportunity and education is not. And so suddenly I had access. Now, I was a kind of a weird kid. I also didn't understand the language or the culture, also Asperger's, so I didn't really understand, the other kids. So I threw myself into math and science. Can we go to the next slide? Is it working now? Oh, fantastic. So I taught myself quantum mechanics and differential equations in middle school, as one does. And I wrote a couple of white papers that I submitted to NASA on a lark. I just wanted them to be my friends. I wanted to be pen pals with them. So this is back when I was 15. When I was 16, they recruited me as a result of some of the white papers I wrote to work on a project that had constituted on one of my white papers to look at the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy. Because you have to remember, this is the late 90s. Stephen Hawking had proven that there's likely a black hole at the center of the galaxy holding it all together, but we had no data to actually prove that that's the case. And so in conjunction with NASA, I built a bunch of satellites, X-ray satellites that went into space to orbit around a central point and collect the data to actually prove that this black hole exists. So one of the things I recognized after I left NASA, I started a bunch of companies, had a couple exits, a couple unicorns. And when I retired, I was sitting on a beach in Belize, thinking about my life and thinking about had I really impacted the world in the way that I had intended. And I realized that I had suffered from mission creep. Sure, we had built some technologies across a bunch of companies that were useful for people, people liked them. But the biggest impact I had at that point was on the investors that invested in the companies. So they 100x to their money and obviously, were able to experience some success. And so as I was sitting there on the beach in Belize sipping mimosas, I was like, what can I do to radically transform billions of people's lives in a way that's really material? Like, what's my legacy going to be? And I recognized that there are probably thousands, if not millions or tens of millions of brilliant people, of Elon Musk's and Jeff Bezos's and Einstein's and Marie Curie's all over the world in refugee camps, in sub-Saharan Africa, working as sheep herders and goat herders that don't have access to the education and opportunity necessary to be able to impact the world around them. And so I decided that's what I was going to do. I recognized that the education space, which both my parents were educators, my first company I founded after I left NASA was an education company. So I decided to go back to that because I realized that it hadn't really been changed or disrupted in 200 years in a material way. Look, if we think about, do you guys know who that is? So that's Ray Dalio. He runs one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, has incredible numbers from a return ROI perspective. But one of the things that he said recently, he wrote a book that got published last year called Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. I don't know if you guys have read his first book, Principles, where he goes through all the details around how he actually managed to be so incredibly successful. He has an AUM in the trillions of dollars. So he has a pretty material impact on the world. And so he asked himself a question. He said, look, I've been very successful historically of managing my own money and managing other people's money through ups and downs in the market. He can protect people's money and make it grow. But he asked himself, what do I do in a changing world order when maybe there's a global pandemic, or there's a change in the global reserve currency status in the world, or there's a world war? Because he was born, or he got into business way after World War II. And his answer to his own question was, I have no idea how I would protect people's money in these really crazy, catastrophic times. So he hired an army of researchers, some of the smartest people in the world, to analyze what he calls the great pattern, right? So the up and down of empire. So he had his team, his army of researchers, study every empire throughout human history to identify the repeatable patterns that emerge when empires rise and empires fall. And they came up with 18 unique and specific steps that go from the rise and then the fall. So step 16 is losing your reserve currency. And then, you go from there. Now, taking politics simply out of it, what do you think step 1 was? Any ideas? Any guesses?
To set the goal, like you said,
That's part of it.
just to.
So it's actually what we're
One
all here to
perfect.
talk about. It's education. So it turns out that when he studied all of the empires in the world, education is the first step of that rise. So now, education can have multiple components. The way he describes it, there's a portion that's STEM, right, of math, science, technology, because that prefaces building out the economy, building out the military, building out everything else. And then there's the other component, which is also just as important, which is civic education. How do you talk to one another, training the population to have grit and perseverance and work through difficult times. But education is foundational. In fact, I was just in Davos interfacing with a bunch of heads of state of countries, CEOs of Fortune 100 companies. Are you guys familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals? There's 17 SDGs that the entire globe is working together to solve. Number 4 is education. I believe education underlies solving all 17 of the SDGs, all 17 of the existential risk challenges that we face as a species, all the global grand challenges according to Singularity University. And of course, Ray Dalio agrees with me. So that's what we're here to talk about today, because it's absolutely critical. Now, one of the things that we've noticed is since the first industrial revolution, we've seen quite a few changes in the way that humans engage with the world. Now, our current education system was predicated on the Prussian and Austrian form of education that was originally designed to train factory workers, right? So if you have a factory and you have a production line, you need everyone to show up on time. If someone shows up late, the entire production line doesn't work, right? Because you need someone in each step. If someone decides to be creative and do something differently, what happens to the production line? Yeah, right, it stops. And so the traditional education system, as it was built from hundreds of years ago, the Prussian and Austrian education system, was designed around teaching people to show up exactly on time when the bell rings, to go to lunch when the bell rings, to come back when the bell rings, to go home when the bell rings, to listen to authority. I don't know if you guys had this when you were in school, but I remember when I was in elementary school in the United States, when we went to the bathroom, all of us lined up in a row, and the teacher would tell us where we go, and you just learn from a really young age to listen to authority and do exactly what you're told. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah.
Because you want your employees in a traditional context to do exactly what they're told. Is that what we need now in the current economic context and the type of workers that we need?
Not everywhere.
Exactly, right? The types of work that we do are completely different. The types of repeatable manual labor is being replaced very rapidly by artificial intelligence. It was replaced 30 years ago in the third industrial revolution by automation and computers, right? And now in the fourth industrial revolution, it's being replaced even more rapidly. And so now the things that people need to learn are how to be able to work creatively, how to have inductive and deductive reasoning, how to collaborate together with other people, how to become computer programmers, how to come up with solutions using technology to solve real problems, right? The type of things that you guys teach here at SMK. Not just following rote things, memorizing things. I mean, you can just look that up on Google, right? So now here's the question, right? If we look at every industry that we engage with, so if you went to a restaurant and it was run exactly the same way it was 300 years ago, the kitchen looked exactly like it did 300 years ago, would you be excited about that? Absolutely not. No, you would run right out of there because there'd be like rats in there and be infested and it'd be unclean and they didn't use soap, right? We have an expectation that things change in the restaurant industry. That's why we don't get sick as much as we used to back in the day. We don't have like the Black Plague, right? If you went to a hospital and it looked like it did 300 years ago, and you went in sick and they said, we're gonna put leeches on you, you wouldn't accept that. You'd want to go to a modern hospital. If you went to a store and it was set up in the same products from 300 years or 200 years ago, you would say, well, that's really weird, right? Well, you can't just you can't pay with a credit card, like what are you doing, right? And so one of the things that we're finding now is the education system hasn't really kept up with the times. And that's been purposeful, right? Now, I think SMK is a little bit different, which is part of the reason we're having a conversation around doing a very deep partnership. And we're talking to a couple other universities right now. We are talking to MIT and Stanford and Imperial College in London about deep partnerships, and of course with SMK as well as the leader in this region. But historically, most educational institutions have focused on, let's show that we work exactly the same way and haven't changed at all. They planted their flag on that, right? I mean, if you look at the University of Virginia, a lot of universities in the United States, they still have columns to show that they look exactly like they did in Greek times. Well, things are changing now, right? Because if you look back to the way that people engage with corporations, everyone expects a certain level of personalization, right? If you're going on Netflix or social media or a dating app or shopping, you expect them to know you, don't you? I mean, if you go to Amazon, they're showing you stuff for, if you're a guy and they're showing you stuff for women's products and dresses, you're like, what are you doing, right? if you go to Netflix and they're showing you like cartoons for kids and you don't have any kids, you're gonna be like, what are you doing? Like, we expect most of the corporations that engage with us to actually understand who we are, to save us time, to surface things that are relevant to us. And so I want to talk a little bit about this, because there's three kind of levels to education, right? Throughout history, there's been three steps in the education process. The first step was teacher-directed learning, right? Which is the traditional teacher in front of 30 students or a number of other students, which we're all very aware of and comfortable with. The second was the self-directed learning. So now it's kind of a hybrid model, right? You go talk to a teacher and then the teacher explains something and you go home, you read books, you watch videos, you learn material asymmetrically or even symmetrically, but you're responsible for your own motivation. There's a new emerging type of education that's called AI-directed learning, where you collect data and the AI supplements, not supplants. So it doesn't replace the teacher, but it supplements the teacher to enable a level of personalization that would be impossible without that artificial intelligence, right? So both my parents are educators. I've spent a lot of time in the education space, personally with the businesses I ran as well. When a teacher is sitting in front of 30 students or 40 students or 100 students in university, is it possible to give like that one-on-one personal attention to an individual?
No.
It's impossible, right? Because you have 30 students to think about. You have to teach to everybody. Now, if you as a teacher, and you guys are all administrators and educators, right? If you as a teacher could sit in front of one student, regardless of which student it was, and just work with them for 8 hours a day, would you be able to teach them basically anything? I think so. So there was a study that came out of I think Princeton in 1982 called the Bloom study. What they did is they took a group of students, they controlled for IQ, socioeconomic background, gender, age, a bunch of other things. They took the first group and taught them in the traditional methodology, right? Standard level lecture format. They took the second group and had a group of teachers teach them one-on-one. So for each student, they had one dedicated teacher. At the end of the semester, they tested them. Now, this study has been repeated like 50 times throughout the world. The first group, they broke down in 5 quintiles, right? So the top 20%, the next 20%, and so forth. The second group, when they tested them with the same exact test, what they found is 90% of those students scored in the top 20th percentile of the first group. Isn't that wild? So what you're looking at,
What was that 10%?
well, the bottom 10% aren't going to be successful no matter what. So put that aside for the time being, right? So if you forget the bottom 10%, the delta is 70%, right? In the first group, 20% scored at this level. In the second group, 90% scored at this level. So that's 70% differential. The question is, how do we reach them? It's not that those 70% are stupid. It's that they haven't been taught in a way that resonates with them. So let me give you an example. One of my friends, Richard, he is dyslexic and has ADD. So when he was growing up 50 years ago in Britain, people thought he was retarded. Now, I know we're not supposed to say that word anymore, but that was a technical term they used, that psychologists and the teachers used, because at the time it was a technical definition, because he couldn't read and he didn't understand the material that was presented to him. Now, it turns out that he's a genius and he created 700 companies and built the Virgin Empire and now is considered one of the preeminent business people of the world. It's Richard Branson. But he wasn't able to learn in the traditional methodology, right? So the question is, out of that 70%, how do we enable all of them to be successful? So instead of dropping out, how do we enable them to have that positive reinforcement and the success that enables them to say, I want to continue? How do you get that 70% who historically maybe have not been successful in grade school and high school to say, you know what, I am going to go to college. I am going to sign up for this and continue. And how do they then learn and be successful? That's the question, right? And so right now we're in an environment where we can collect a significant amount of data on each individual to enable professors to be significantly more effective at being able to provide the level of education that that student needs. Because let's be real, you can't have 50% of the population teach the other 50%. It's not possible, right? So that one-on-one instruction, that's still only limited to the people that have the resources to do that. Yeah, that's the super wealthy and so forth. But how do we do that at scale? We're always going to need teachers. That's not going to change. But how do we enable teachers to do that one-on-one? So there's a couple things that we can do. So when you think of personalization, there's a couple components of that. There is focus, then there is content, and there's delivery, okay? So how many of you guys saw this documentary?
Is it regarding Netflix?
I'm sorry?
Is it about Netflix?
It's not about Netflix, but the documentary was on Netflix.
Sorry, yeah.
It's about Spotify.
That's not the one about Spotify.
I have seen, I think.
I
Just
think you
it
have.
was
I mean,
a
it's
few
the most
years ago.
popular documentary that they won all sorts of awards. They were the #1 watched documentary in the world. It's about Facebook.
It's a social dilemma,
It
yeah?
was about the social media.
What's that? I heard you.
Social dilemma.
Who was it that spoke?
Someone from.
Someone was speaking from the
The
thing,
voice.
and they said the right answer. I don't know who it was though.
Yeah, social dilemma.
Yes,
movie.
yes, that's exactly right. So this is a social dilemma. So a couple of my friends, Tristan Harris and Joe Toscano, who happens to be on my advisory board, were in this movie. Now, they actually shared quite a few things that we within the tech industry in Silicon Valley had been talking about amongst ourselves for quite a while. We were quite concerned about this because companies like Facebook, now Meta, and Google under YouTube and others used a lot of technology that came out of the Stanford Media Lab. They spent billions of dollars on armies of psychiatrists and psychologists and behaviorists and and NLP professionals, neurolinguistic programming, to figure out how do you hijack dopamine feedback loops within your brain to get you to get addicted to this. These things are, some people say, more addictive than heroin, and really giving them to children, right? Because how many of you have been in a situation where you're in a meeting and you're like, oh, I have to check, oh, I had someone like my picture. Right now, if that works for us as adults that are all very successful and doing well, think about the impact on 18, 19, 20-year-old kids that were raised with these things, right? Have you guys seen these pictures of a bunch of kids at a party? You guys remember when we all went to parties? I mean, I'm kind of old, but when we were at parties, we'd like talk to each other and hang out. There's all these pictures that are coming out now of these kids in like high school and college that are all in a party, and they're all just sitting there on their phones. It's like, what kind of party is this? This is terrible, right? Or like people that are like at restaurants, instead of talking to one another, they're just sitting there on their phones. There's a reason for that. This has been produced specifically for that. It's called doom scrolling. I shared a stage with this guy, Ira Raskin, who created the unlimited scroll. It was at the Unintended Consequences of Technology conference in Silicon Valley. He started off his speech by saying, I'm sorry, I created this technology thinking it would be cool, but it wound up stealing hundreds of millions of man hours of productive time from the human race. So that exists. The rabbit is out of the bag. Pandora's box has been opened. It's not going away anytime soon. And so in this new environment, how do we engage with it? So the first thing for education, for teachers, is capturing people's attention. Look, I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a wedding in the south of France in this castle, and I happened to be sitting across from the CFO for SoulCycle. Are you guys familiar with SoulCycle?
Yes.
Okay, cool. It's like a super popular thing, like, you know. And I was just making conversation. So I was like, who are your biggest competitors? Is it like Equinox or Barry's Boot Camp or Hollywood Fitness? Who is it? And she said, no, Brian, our biggest competitors are Facebook, Netflix, and the bar down the street. The biggest competitors weren't the other physical training places or gyms. It's what are people doing with their time and attention if they're not gonna go to work out? Well, it's Facebook, or they're binging a Netflix show that's inane and they're gonna forget after a week, or they're going to a bar, right? And so when we think about what is the competition for the attention of the students that are learning, it's not all the other universities. It's not educational platforms online for SMK. The competition that you guys have is the same thing. It's Facebook. Well, maybe not TikTok and Instagram, right? Because I think old people like me use Facebook. All the youngins use cooler platforms. Or Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and the bar down the street. So the first step of education, a leading indicator, is focus. If you're not paying attention, it's unlikely that you're going to learn the material. The second piece is content. So how do we present content in a way that resonates much more deeply with the individual? Now, if we're competing with Netflix, guess what? We're also competing with Beyonce and Taylor Swift and music videos and the latest Marvel movie, right? So when we think about how we're conveying information, are we conveying this information in a way that the person can capture and collect? Because they're used to a certain level of attention. They're used to the content resonating with them. And finally, it's a delivery methodology. Do you guys remember way back in the day, I think like a decade ago, there was a whole thing about how people are either visual, auditory, or experiential learners, kinesthetic. It turned out after a bunch of studies that that wasn't actually true. People switched back and forth. So that was debunked. But it turns out that people are all three, but it depends on their mental state and their emotional state around which of those resonate most deeply with them in that moment. And so when we think about all that, how do we leverage emerging technology like Web3 and artificial intelligence to be able to figure out how to deliver content and information to that individual in such a way that they learn more effectively? And then how do we collect data to have granular information about whether what we're doing is working or not, right? Historically, if a teacher taught a course, it was either after the quizzes or the tests or the final grade where the teacher was able to determine how well the students did, right? How well they learned the material. So today, you can get that granular level of detail on a minute-to-minute basis during a lecture, during the class. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what Ahura does, and we'll leave some time for questions. So what we do is we collect over 10,000 biometric data points per second per user while they're learning. So we have the most robust set of data that's connected to how people consume information. We do that completely consensually. People agree to it, and we have positioned ourselves as the polar opposite of Facebook. Facebook has an exploitative data model where they take that data from people and then they sell it to make money through advertising. What we've done is we say, we collect this data, but we're not going to use it for anything other than educating you. And oh, by the way, you own all of your data. You have agency over it. You get to decide what happens to it and how it's used, period, full stop. That's part of the reason the United Nations and the World Economic Forum and European Commission keep inviting me to speak from stage. I also started a nonprofit with Richard Branson to address ethical artificial intelligence and mitigate some of the risks from unethical actors within the world. But so what happens when you collect that much data while people are learning is a couple of things. Number one, it gives that students a feedback loop that enables them to understand what's happening with themselves. Okay, so how many of you guys remember Fitbits? Nobody? Fitbits? You guys remember Fitbits? Yeah, the thing that measures how many steps you take and how active you are. Okay, so when that first came out, and they realized that if you want to be super healthy, you need to have 10,000 steps a day. It turned out that just by wearing the Fitbit, measuring the number of steps that someone took and feeding it back to them, that by itself increases the number of steps a person takes by 3,000 steps a day. It turns out when you measure something and feed it back to a person, that changes behavior. And so the first thing we do is we feed information back to the user. So if they're sitting in a class, we did a pilot with the Harvard Extension School. So obviously Harvard Extension School is a little bit different than Harvard proper. It's adult learners work asymmetrically, but we're able to study what people are doing. It turned out for every hour that someone studies at home, they actually only studied 7 to 8 minutes. You know what they did with the rest of their time?
I would know.
Yeah. They went to Facebook, they went to Instagram, YouTube, they were watching the football game, right? They were playing with their dog, they were checking their phone, they're doing all sorts of things, right? Watching the news. So just by feeding that information back to them at the end of every study session, we're like, hey, this is where you spent all your time. By the end of the semester, students were studying 35 to 45 minutes. So they were a lot more focused. So that's the first piece. Number two, we're able to feed all this data back to the professor. So when they get all the anonymized data, they can see, oh, at minute 42 in your lecture, 65% of the students went to Google and searched something. Oh, shoot, maybe that means that I skipped a step. I went from A to C and skipped step B and a bunch of people got confused. Well, now you know for the next lecture, right? Maybe in minute 35, 60% of the females just checked out and stopped paying attention. Oh, shoot, maybe that joke that they told that they thought was funny just pissed off a lot of people, right? Or maybe at minute 12, a substantial portion of people just went on Facebook. It's like, oh, maybe you're being really boring. Maybe you need to find a better way to resonate with people and make it a little bit more entertaining so they pay attention, right? So whereas the feedback loop for the students can help them pay closer attention, the feedback loop for the instructors can also enable them in a granular level of detail, figure out how to connect with this changing demographic of students that are not the same as the students from 30 years ago, right? And then when students are learning at home, when they're doing their homework and following up and reading into additional material, we can actually change the content itself. Because here at SMK, you guys have a whole bunch of content, right? You have the teachers explaining the material, and then you have like your digital textbooks and the homework assignments, and you have text-based and video-based and all this other stuff, right? And so we can actually figure out how to say, okay, when they're studying at home to study for their test or for their quiz or doing their homework, what is the most effective way to deliver that content to them? Is it through text, experiential, video, or audio? And even within those 4 categories, can we alter that content in real time with artificial intelligence to resonate with them much more effectively? So one of the things that's in production right now and it's going to roll out at some point in the future is using deepfakes, for example. You guys know what deepfakes are? So that's being used right now for entertainment and politics. But imagine if, well, we're collecting all the data, so we're figuring out what resonates with someone. But imagine if for a particular piece of content, we're able to have Beyonce explain that material, or Taylor Swift, or Obama, or a 72-year-old British guy with a posh accent and a tweed jacket, or a fashion model, in a way that resonates with that person based on their unique needs in that moment. So we're talking about hyper-personalized learning that's driven by data and AI. So this just shows a little bit of the data points we collect on a person's face. So we collect everything from eye tracking, facial expressions, micro expressions, their fidget score, how much they're moving around, pupil dilation, facial flushing. We capture all sorts of things from all that. We capture, are they frustrated or excited? Are they focused or distracted? Are they anxious or happy? And everything in between. We capture their tone of voice when they're speaking, to capture their mental state as well. And what are they actually doing? Is the game on in the background? Are they playing with their dogs? Are they talking to their friend while they're doing everything, right? We also capture all the websites they visit through a contextual mapping that we created to figure out the exact moment that they get distracted, because let's say that a teacher is teaching something and they go to Google and double click on an idea. They're not distracted, they're still figuring out stuff, and that's okay. But when they then switch to Instagram or Facebook, or they're clicking around on Wikipedia until they get to World War II when they're supposed to be studying Java, then it's like, oh, okay, you got distracted because that's how the internet works. So we can figure that out in real time. So I'm gonna pause here. I just threw a lot of information at you guys. I'm gonna pause for questions, so.
What does this equipment that gathers all that information physically look like?
We do it with a laptop. So every laptop these days comes with a camera and a microphone, and we can capture what websites they visit. So we just require, and our technology integrates with every LMS and system because it actually doesn't require an API integration. So it's like a, have you guys ever used like Salesforce or HubSpot, or I mean, even Facebook, you log in and you log in with your personal password and it goes on. So we have a technology where, an app where when they're studying, they just turn Ahura on and it enables them to learn faster. It collects the data, it provides them feedback.
We have some questions. Sorry, Brian, we stopped sharing the slides because now you can see how many
Oh yeah, totally.
we have.
Hey, everybody.
There's a big audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
here.
There's a lot more in the audience than I thought there would be, so.
Yeah, so they joined so probably they also could have some questions and then we could ask them to raise a hand for those who are online.
I see a hand. Am I
Yeah,
pronouncing it? Oh, no, that wasn't.
it was a mistake, or you wanted to ask a question because you raised a hand? Sometimes it's just.
So what are the
Yes,
questions?
sorry, it was mistake, sorry.
Oh, no worries. What other questions?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's wonderful things, of course, but in this case, those who are learning, are they not coming passive? What about my motivation, about my will? I'm just sitting, okay, at this moment you can do such things. Maybe tomorrow I will be sitting, put all material in my head.
Sure.
I don't want to make any attempts to reach this material, this knowledges, and so on and so on. So,
I get what you're saying. I would push back on that and say this actually makes people more active in their learning process. Because if a student is, and I remember when I was in college, you go to a lecture hall, some of my lectures had 200 students in them, 300, some of them 30. The professor's teaching, you're just taking notes. By having access to the data, at the end of the class, you could see exactly what you did, when you were paying attention, when you weren't paying attention, what were the drivers of your distraction, to be able to then say the next time you have this urge to pick up your phone, it's like, oh, I'm gonna see that I was distracted because I was on my phone or what I'm doing on my computer. So you know what, I'm gonna power through that. And I'm actually gonna stay focused and do this. It's just like when you're working out, right? If you're running, everyone always has the same thought in their head. It's like, oh, I'm really tired. I can just stop now. But it's like, no, I decided I'm going to run for a certain length of time. So you power through that, right? So this enables people to have more attention. Look, there's some percentage of the population that are going to power through regardless. Let's call it the top 10 or 20%. But then you have everybody else that needs support. So for example, if you're, and I don't have any kids, but if you're raising like a 6-year-old and you're trying to teach them to not eat a candy before they have dinner, their natural instinct, if they're living unconsciously, which most kids are, they're just going to do whatever feels right. And so we have to help them to make the right decision rather than what comes naturally, which is, ooh, sugar, that tastes good and feels good. And so in that moment for a 19-year-old, what feels good is that dopamine feedback loop where they're like, oh, someone commented on my Instagram. Oh, I got another 10 likes. Oh, it feels so good and popular. That feels good. And so by providing that data stream to them and pushing them into the right behavior, especially with nudges and gamification as well, we can actually push them to correct behavior that will enable them to be more successful, get better grades, learn the material faster, and then graduate, right? Because oftentimes with classical conditioning and operant conditioning from psychology, what winds up happening is if we get, instead of positive reinforcement, if we get something called punishment, it reduces the incidence of that particular behavior. And so if a kid or a college student feels like they're not doing well in school, that feels like punishment because it makes them feel bad. Just like if I'm in 6th grade and I go to the board and to do a math question, if I get it wrong and the teacher says, "Oh, you're really dumb. I can't believe you got that wrong," and you're getting embarrassed in front of the class, the kid goes and sits down and says, "I'm just not good at math. I'm going to do less of it because it feels bad." Instead of, "Oh, I got one thing wrong, but it's okay, I'll figure it out," right? And so in the same way, if we enable those students to be more successful right off the bat, when they're successful and they learn the material, they feel good about themselves. They're like, "Oh, I feel great. I'm so smart. I figured this out," which makes them want to pay more attention. It makes them want to get that feeling more. Now, the problem is that you're still battling this thing, which means if they're in class in the first week or the first 5 weeks, and they keep getting distracted because there's that cute girl over there or that cute guy that's texting them and they're responding and they keep going on Facebook and they just met a bunch of people. So they're like excited and they're not paying attention and they get bad grades on that quiz or don't understand the material and feel like they're falling behind. That's punishment according to classical and operant conditioning, which makes them reduce the incidence of behavior, which is actually showing up to class, paying attention, trying to do well, which creates a vicious circle that causes them to go down and eventually drop out. Versus empowering them to do the things that enable them to be successful, which we all know focus and attention are a leading indicator of learning. So if we focus on the controllable things that are going to enable them to do well, that creates a virtuous cycle, which gives them positive reinforcement and makes them want to increase the incidence of that behavior.
Does it mean that then you have to adapt the program to or to personalize the program? For example, if you receive so many different data from the lecture, and people are very different ones. Once is boring on 5th minute of the lecture, and then 31st, for example, on 41st minute of the lecture. So how to find the right attitude towards everybody of them,
Sure.
then, so that the lecturer has to make a special program for everybody. Then it's again,
Well, so
we come to the same question.
Right, so that's impossible, right? A lecturer with 50 students or 100 students or 30 students can't personalize to every student in that classroom.
Mhm.
Now, what they can do is find out if what they're saying isn't resonating. Because if it's not resonating and everybody is falling asleep, that's different than one person's falling asleep, right? And so historically, if I'm teaching or if I'm presenting, and I present a lot, if I see everyone on their phones or like whispering or, you know, nodding off, I'm like, whoa, something isn't working, and I can change it in real time and say, okay, I'm going to do something, everybody get up, stretch, or tell a funny story or tell an anecdote, right? If you're a teacher and have a whole bunch of people online, right, in a hybrid type environment, and even if you have 300 students in front of you, sometimes it's harder to see everybody. But having that feedback loop for the professor also enables that professor to say, hey, 80% of the people were distracted. Okay, so what can I do to capture more attention from more people? It isn't about each individual. Now, we do empower the students to take responsibility for their own attention, because by being able to see, hey, how focused was I? Oh, and let me see how focused all the other students were. Oh, wow, all these other people had more points than I did, and I had lower points in focus. Hey, tomorrow I want to win this game. I want to get more points in attention and focus. Then it becomes a competition to see how much more focused they can be to everybody else. We can have notifications and nudges and all that stuff as well. but they also take more responsibility for their own focus because they see at the end of the class, oh, I'm spending all this money to come to this class, I'm spending all this time, but I spent 7% or 7 minutes actually focused in this hour. Like if I'm gonna come, like, okay, I need to do a better job, because it's not like a student goes in and says, oh, I don't want to pay attention. Right, they just get distracted, they hear a bing, and 30 minutes later, they're like, where did the time go? I was just sitting there scrolling, right? Now, at home though, it's different, because we all know that education is two components. There's the in-class learning, and then there's the supplemental work that's done, whether they're doing their homework or studying for a quiz or studying for a test, reviewing the material. Now that material that's supplemental to the teacher explaining it, that can be hyper-personalized as well. So it's a combination of both. Look, we're never going to replace teachers. We always need teachers to be there to hold people's hands through it. The question is, how do we empower teachers to be that much more effective? And that's what we're really seeing in the United States. There's a whole bunch of universities that are going bankrupt, number one. There's a massive change that's happening now. The United States is a little bit different than here, obviously. The United States is like $50,000 to $60,000 a year. So people are graduating with like $250,000 in debt. It's a little different than Europe. But with that said, the only thing that's constant in the world is change. If you remember, how many of you guys used Blockbuster back in the day? Oh, there wasn't Blockbuster here?
No.
They were different type of.
Oh, was it a different, was there like video rental
Yes.
companies?
Right.
Okay, so I know the United States, Blockbuster famously went out of business. How many video rental places still exist here?
No one.
None, they all went out of business, right? Do you guys remember Nokia? Okay, they had at one point like 70% market share of the phone market, right? The handheld phone. Where are they now? So I remember watching the press conference where Nokia sold their company for pennies on the dollar. And the CEO was crying. He was like, we did everything right, but we still lost. And I would say they're like, no, you didn't. If you had done everything right, you'd still be a dominant position. What they did is they were not able to see all the changes that are happening in the world and the changing ways that people engage with technology. And so as we move forward, we're seeing that, right? So there are organizations like MIT that are like, whoa, things are changing. Let's see how we can stay on top of that, right? That's why they're doing a partnership with us. Same with Imperial College, same with a bunch of other organizations. And so mostly we actually work with corporations, because even corporations realize that learning is massively important, continual learning while a person is still on the job. So a lot of the corporations that are embracing artificial intelligence are also seeing that. Now, this isn't something that's limited to universities. What we're seeing in every industry is a change that's very similar to what happened in the late 90s. If you guys remember when the internet first came out, and there were some companies that were like, oh, this is just a fad, it's going to go away. And then there was a bunch of other companies that were like, this is going to change how everything works. And the companies that embraced the internet, Web 1.0, crushed it. The ones that didn't, either they died or years later, they're like, whoa, hold up, now we're going to use it, but then they were 5 years behind. So now in Web 3 with artificial intelligence, it's the same thing, where some organizations within every industry are saying, how can we leverage this emerging technology to sustain competitive advantage over everybody else in our industry? And some people are saying, we'll wait and see, let's watch everybody else do it first. So what other questions do you guys have?
Maybe someone from a virtual environment would like to jump in with a question.
So students during lectures have to sit with laptops or phones switched on with cameras working.
Definitely
Yeah?
not phones. We don't partner with phones at all, because with education, you don't want that. Now, most students are going to have their laptops out anyway, right? Are they taking notes?
Because
how many
I
students-
imagine how it's happening at home where they are working with computer, but during the lectures or seminars, workshops.
Well, you guys tell me, I mean, do the students take notes on paper with a pen, or are they taking notes on their computer? 50-50, okay. And so it's completely up to them. The students that want to continue with their pen and not use the computer, they're more than welcome to. This is an opt-in mechanism. They don't have to use it. But if they choose to use it and they want to be able to learn faster and be more focused, then yeah, they open their computer, they take notes. And let's be real, I mean, in a corporate context, when they get jobs afterwards, most people take notes on the computer because they immediately then need to review those notes, organize those notes. They don't want to take paper notes and then rewrite them, right? I mean, in a corporate context, we all use computers for everything. And so, so that's generally how we do things.
We have a question from our IT head of IT department, Andres.
Andres, how are you?
Hello, Brian. I have one question. What are the main distractions? Maybe you have grouped them, and what will be suggestions for students, for teachers, how avoid those distractions? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So from our pilot with the Harvard Extension School, and then with a number of our other partners that we've worked with, we found that they fall into several categories. One of the distractions is social media. So whether that's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and so forth. That's one of the big ones. One is news. So people just getting bored and going to different news channels and stuff. One of them is text messaging. Like, so they get in group chats or text messages to their friends, just communicating or like sending emails. One, believe it or not, even while they're being watched, is porn, which is hilarious. This is especially for people that are learning at home in a hybrid model or an asymmetric model, or even symmetric. They'll be sitting there studying and we're watching them. They know we're watching them and they still do it. It's wild to me. And then one of the others, especially if they're, and sorry for saying that, I know it's uncouth or whatever, but it's just you asked, so I'm sharing the data. And then one of them is distractions at home. So if they're at home, they're learning on a video, right? If they're learning in a hybrid model, it's their dog coming up or their dog taking a poop on the carpet that they have to go solve, or their children running around, or their parents or their friends that are in the house, they're distracting, or they have the TV on the background. So they have the computer and the TV, so they keep watching How I Met Your Mother or football or whatever they're watching. So things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also have a question, because of course we can eliminate the social media and make them learn as much as they can, but also I think the world is changing and a lot of young people are having the short attention span. And because of that, it's not only the social media, which is a problem, but also anything like that. So, but it's not really can be eliminated, or even if the information is very, very interesting, which you give them and personalized, they still will have those distractions. So is it actually like, can you defeat that somehow, or?
So that is a fantastic question. So we can look at this in one of two ways. We can either throw our hands up in the air and say, attention span of young people is going away and we can't do anything about it. So let's just.
But does anything need to be done about it, actually?
Yes, things can be done about it. So we can retrain the population to actually have a longer attention span, just like certain technologies train the population to have a shorter attention span. So I remember when I was young, we watched MTV, a whole bunch of academics came out and said, the problem with MTV and these music videos is it's shortening people's attention span to 2 minutes. And that was a huge thing at the time. That was a problem. And now, after TikTok and Instagram, it's lowering people's attention span to 10 seconds. So if you have a little reel or TikTok, if it's not interesting in the first 10 seconds, they're like, next, right? Now, with that being said, I can tell you a personal story. So I do this thing every once in a while. I go to a 10-day meditation retreat where you take all these vows, vow chastity, vow poverty, vow whatever. You put everything away, no phone, no radio, no writing. You just meditate for 14 hours a day. So I remember the first time I went and I sat down and I'm meditating, and they tell you to focus on the breath as it enters and exits your nose. You're doing that literally for 3 days, 14 hours a day in 1 hour increments. It's extremely boring. But so I sat there and I told my brain, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're not gonna think about anything. We're gonna focus on the breath as it enters and exits. About 7 seconds later, I'm like, I wonder what my friends are doing. Oh, there's a party this week. Oh man, I'm really hungry. Like 40 minutes later, my attention came back. I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be meditating. Oh no. And I was like, how much time did I lose, right? And I recognized how weak our minds can be, because it's just a muscle. Just like if you work out, right? The first time you work out, it really hurts, right? And then over time you work out and you can lift heavier and heavier objects. And so your brain is exactly the same way. What you focus on and how you train it enables it to do what you want. And so through meditation, I learned how to focus for 14 hours straight. Now with students, if you provide them the tools so that they can actually teach themselves how to focus for longer periods of time, that enables them to be successful, not only in those classes, but then also in life. That enables them to get better jobs and get jobs after class and all that stuff, right? And so by providing feedback, so whether it's notifications, so if they have their computer on and they're getting distracted, a pop-up comes, it's like, hey, you got distracted. It's like, oh, okay, it's a reminder, cool, I'm back to work. The next time, they figure it out a little faster and faster. Or at the end of the session, they see, I only studied for 7 minutes. You know what, next time, I'm gonna study for 10 minutes. Okay, cool, so they were focused for 10 minutes out of the 60-minute class. Then the next time, 15 minutes out of the 60 minutes. Then the next time, 20 minutes. And by the end of the semester, they're focusing for 35 to 42 minutes, which is way better than 7, right? And so it's about small incremental changes over time that enable people to learn proper behavior and how to actually control their own minds.
But also, doesn't it give it paranoia that you're constantly being watched? And if you want like to give yourself a little bit like a candy, let's say as a child wants a candy, you also want to give yourself a bit of attention on social media. You feel like you're being watched. And it always gives you paranoia. Okay, I need to do that. I need to study right now because like I cannot do that. Like,
yeah, totally. No, I get where you're coming from. That is a concern that people have, right? Of are we being watched, like the data and so forth, GDPR, things like that. There's a couple of things. Like if you're learning one-on-one in front of someone and I'm sitting there and you're teaching me, let's call it the quadratic equation. And while you're teaching me the equation, I keep looking at my phone. Aren't you gonna be like, hey, Brian, I'm right here talking to you, right? I don't know if anybody's had this in a relationship where like you're at home talking to your partner and then you pick up your phone. They're like, hey, I'm right here talking to you. Like, come on, right? So it's more similar to that. Now, I'll also say that some of us that are an older generation are like, oh no, I don't want to be watched. This newer generation, they're just used to being watched. They know Facebook is watching them. They know Instagram is watching. Everybody knows TikTok and the Chinese government is watching them, but they still download TikTok, right? They know that anything they do online, somebody somewhere is paying attention to what they're doing. That's how Amazon knows that you want to buy a particular thing. They're like, hey, you want to buy this? It's like, yes, I do. How did you know? And so that we're being watched constantly. That's just the world we live in.
but it's kind of different types of being watched. Like on the TikTok, for example, like, yes, they will know what kind of, what you like, what you dislike, but it's not a huge information and like, it doesn't really reflect on you. But if you're being watched doing something bad, let's say if you're being studied, it makes you feel bad that you're being watched and like you get caught on the small, bad thing.
So that's part of the reason that we have taken such a strong stance on AI ethics and data ethics. That's why we don't take their data and sell it to governments or marketing agencies or advertising. And that's why for the professors to see it, it gets anonymized. So it's not like the professor will see, hey, while you were studying, these are all the websites you went to. The professor doesn't see that on a per person basis. They see it anonymized in a group setting to say 43% of your students did X, 7% did Y, right? And so it's a little bit different. We've made legally binding commitments around what we do and don't do with that data. And so we use it only to enable that person to get control over their own attention and focus, which billions of dollars have been spent to steal from them. And so this is working against an entire industry that has monetized your attention in what's called the attention economy. Attention right now is more valuable than oil. And so every organization in the world, tech company, is taking people's attention and using it to make money. We're saying, hey, we can counteract that. And oh, by the way, we can do it ethically. And we believe we can become a $10 billion company doing things the exact right way to create a paradigm around the world where other companies can then say, hey, let's actually do this ethically, because otherwise things are going to go sideways. So I totally get where you're coming from. And we are, battling against the current perception as well in the world that, when people collect data, they're naturally going to use it for something negative. And so we've taken our stand that we're in the opposite camp.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I don't think MIT would trust us.
And
or Harvard.
In what ways a computer can get back my attention? Just by sending messages, pop-ups, or something more?
Through our platform?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways. The first is feeding you the data back to you, just like the Fitbit and the 3,000 steps. So at the end of every session, you being able to see your progress over time, you being able to see what you did with your time. So giving you that data and arming you with that that information so that you can make better decisions moving forward. That's number one, which by the way is the same idea behind grading students, right? It's the same idea when someone takes a quiz, it's a feedback loop where it's like, oh, you got a C. What does that mean? How did you do compared to everybody else? But it's just a longer time frame. This gives you that immediate feedback loop. The second way is through nudges and notifications and behavioral modification through that. So if they're getting distracted, there's different levels of like turning the screen yellow, turning it red, giving them notifications like, hey, you said you were paying attention. If you don't want to pay attention, that's fine, just turn off Ahura. But if you are studying and you are supposed to be paying attention, we're going to bring you back to that, right? Because oftentimes when people get distracted, they don't mean to get distracted, but their attention gets stolen from them and it takes them 30, 40 minutes to come back. Well, if we can enable them to come back in 5 minutes or 1 minute, then it enables them to pay more attention. And then the third area is through gamification. So right now, I mean, all the likes that people see on Facebook and Instagram, that's all gamified. If you had 100 likes, but you had no idea how many likes anybody else in the world had, it would be completely meaningless. But when you see your friend get 200 likes and you get 100 likes, you're like, I need to post better content. But if your friends are all getting 10 likes and you're getting 100, you're like, woo, I'm so cool, right? And we all want to be cool and important and all that stuff. And so by tracking your attention and being able to see either anonymized through the whole thing or for organizations that are comfortable with it of, hey, who's winning on the attention and focus game? And there's ways to then motivate people and add that into the, so I don't know if you guys do this, but I don't know in my school, some of my classes had attendance requirements, right? And then if you, like a portion of your grade wasn't how well you did on your classes or on your tests, but your attendance, right? So if you had 100% attendance, you would get that full 10%. If you had 50% attendance, you'd get marked off and you'd get 5%, right? If that 10%, you guys know what I'm talking about? It's the exact same thing, but this is much more granular. So for example, some organizations are like, hey, we'll give a portion of your grade based on how well you pay attention. But instead of using attendance as a stand-in, because someone could come, raise their hand, be like, I'm here, and then sleep the whole time, but they're still there, versus actually paying attention, right? Well, so you can gamify it, make it fun, or you could also even add a grade component to motivate people through incentives. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I have a kind of a complex question because the solution you provide is focusing on bringing more attention to what is delivered online.
Mm-hmm.
And you measure it by some external sensors, like, you know, the sight of your eyes, your movements, some fractions, whatever is happening, and by what you are watching or reading.
That's exactly right.
So my question comes to this. Okay, so how do you measure or how do you perceive what is attention? Because is it more cognitive or more external, like sensoric activity? Because I have this like preposition or like some assumption from my experience, you know, that there are some people who could be attentive, but with doing something else. I mean, like for myself, if I need to concentrate more, I need to like have a pen in and I need something to have, so I can look somewhere else, not in the screen. It doesn't matter, I don't hear or I'm not concentrated. It's just external look.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean my cognitive abilities are somewhere outside.
Sure.
So I'm just, you know, thinking about, and other thing is how do you measure attention by browsing, the content, because is this like only NLP, natural language processing, because if you only detect some keywords, they could, like, if there's not a very contextual thing, when I learn something and I find some like new word, which I didn't know before, and that's interesting. Okay, I try to look at this, then it goes me to something really not directly connected to the previous content.
Yeah.
But then like I say, wow, that's so interesting. And when I can look at the text of some Lithuanian poet, and afterwards I could go to some medieval like studies of something like, I don't know, like cosmos or whatever, but it still expands in my knowledge.
Sure.
It's still, I'm good with this because I knew the thing I didn't know also, and it somehow it is connected.
Right.
It doesn't have direct link.
Sure.
So there is some kind of like, in this big rhizoma of knowledge, there are so many connections, you cannot have direct contact because this is a huge network of the knowledge. And also I agree with the Rana's concerns about that being washed, and because it could be annoying if you always pop up, you are not consuming enough. Okay, just shut up.
Yeah.
Why,
Yeah.
how you do know? Because I just look somewhere. It could be like, more paranoid or annoying activity. So, and the last thing in this question is, is the focus of attention the result of the knowledge we want to gain, like the result of the learning is what we become capable of.
Right.
It's not how we did it, and because we are so different. One person can learn in 5 minutes, for the other one could take like 1 month or a lifetime, to learn something, because you're not capable of this, but you're capable of something else. So so you can be concentrated for a very specific thing, but if you are not capable of learning this, it could take you the whole time to learn it. For the other, this concentration could be much less, and he could just get it. Okay, I got it. Okay, just give me another task.
Sure.
So that's such a different thing. So I think, and what we are aimed to do at educational system is to focus on the best result that person could provide for themselves, for the society, whatever, like, but how to achieve the better result. And being attentive, it's one of the aspects. But I see how I'm quite questioning, how this solution which you provide could serve a bigger purpose.
Yeah.
To get more like results from the learning process. I think it should be much more complex like solution to this. Yeah.
Absolutely. So those are fantastic questions. So I'll cover each of them. And the answer is yes, it is much more complex. So for the first part is it is contextual, and we have to calibrate for the individual. So for example, some people, when they're really happy, they smile really big. Like they're constantly smiling, they have a big smile on their face. Some people, just the tips of their mouth go up a little bit and they're like so happy, they're the happiest they've ever been because they're just a little less expressive, right? So that's part of where the AI comes in. So we calibrate the individual over time, not only from all of the facial expressions and micro expressions, what they're doing with their eyes, but also their behavior to determine how well they're doing. And of course, because there's a learning feedback loop, so when people take quizzes and tests, you can actually figure out from the assessments how well they pay attention and how well they do on the actual understanding material. So then you connect the two to figure out, okay, so this person learns really well this way, but this person, they were really unfocused and they got a bad grade. So this is something that they need to focus on, right? So we do calibrate for the individual. It is personalized. That's kind of the whole point of artificial intelligence. The second piece, again, you're absolutely right from a contextual mapping perspective. So there's NLP. So if someone's studying things, there will be a string of words. So in the demo, we just use Python, but generally there's a string of words. But our technology looks at everything on the page, analyzes it through NLP and through our AI to then determine, is it something that's actually connected? And are they focused? Now, our platform is continuously learning. So right now it's at a certain level of efficacy. Sometimes it misfires. But then over time with more data and calibrated for the individual, it will continue to increase and improve just like any other AI does. And to your third point, you're absolutely right. It's not just focus. So we have 3 scores that we give every student. The first one is focus. That's where I spent most of my attention here in this lecture. The second is their learn score. The third is their retention score, because you need all 3. And you multiply those 3 scores against each other to see how well they did. Because the retention is a leading indicator of learning. The learn score is their coincident indicator of learning, and retention is the lagging indicator of learning, right? So the focus is the first piece. Now, there is a very small subset of the population that can do extremely well without focusing. I know when I was in school, I didn't really pay attention to any class or read books or do homework for other classes. And it was endlessly annoying to my teachers, but I still aced everything. So there are a small population of people that do that, and you can calibrate for that and figure it out, right? There's always anomalies within the bell curve, right? But then the learn score, you're able to see how well they do on the micro assessments, quizzes, and tests that you already have, and then you contextualize it back to the individual to figure out what's the most effective way for them to learn, because it's not only the time that they spend in class, it's also the time they spend at home studying, so you can actually enable them to learn how they learn, because that's a huge part of our journey as adults, learning what's the most effective way for ourselves to consume information. So the AI helps them with that. The third piece I think is really fun. It's that retention piece, because we can then figure out over time and graph out how long it takes someone to forget information. And what's really cool is this is something that's never been done in the history of the human race. We can take, let's say it takes them 6 months to forget a piece of content or information. We can then look back and cross-reference that against what was their mental state when they learned that information, what was the delivery methodology, how focused were they, how did they consume that information? Was it through video, experiential, audio, whatever? How much did they how much did they learn outside of class as well? Did they spend more time practicing it? Did they study it at home? Did they do the homework assignments? And were they frustrated? Were they excited? Were they annoyed? Because you can come into a class, maybe they just had a fight with their significant other the night before, or maybe they partied really late and they were hungover. And so you can actually see that in the data. So you can see, based on their mental state and their health state, how long it actually takes them to forget information. Now that's useful not only for the individual, so that they can learn things more effectively moving forward, because really retention is the name of the game, right? But also for the university and for the educators to be able to determine what are the things that you can, what are the levers that you can pull in order to increase those retention numbers long term. Because at the end of the day, when a student graduates after 3 years and goes to an actual job, if they just crammed everything just for the test and don't remember any of the material, and then they go and try to build a bridge and it falls down, no, it's not a great thing, right? But if they retain that information, if we can pull the levers to figure out in a very granular way how to enable people to retain that information longer. And the beautiful thing about AI is you can then say, hey, Manesh looks like these other 500 people from a data perspective. Now, you don't sit there with pen and paper doing that. The AI figures that out. That Manesh, he may be completely different in every other category, but the way he learns is very similar to these other 500 people. So then you can make predictions that for Manesh to not only pay attention, but also learn and retain that information for longer, certain things need to happen. And so then you empower the individual, but then also empower the community to enable it to happen.
So if you know, for example, like that half a year ago, somebody had a fight together and they didn't learn this, how are you going to use it in the future? Are you gonna, for example, that you see the person is in the same state, they're a bit more worried or something. So will your system suggest them, okay, repeat this material because probably you're not going to remember it after half a year. Is it?
Yeah,
That's how
so-
it works?
Do you have an Apple Watch?
No, not really.
Is that a
It's
different kind of
not,
digital
yeah,
watch?
it's
Okay.
Xiaomi.
So with the Apple Watch, I know mine tells me, hey, every once in a while, stand up.
Mhm.
Or hey, do a breathing exercise or go for a walk, right? So sometimes if you're really frustrated because you had a fight with your significant other, maybe the platform says, hey, right now, you're not in a, like you can consume this information, but you're probably not going to retain it because your mind is on something else.
Mhm.
Go for a walk, do some jumping jacks, do a little meditation and come back to it. Or if they're learning a class and the AI can figure out, okay, they were in class, sure, they were focused, but we know because of their mental state, they did not retain this information. When they're studying at home, it can say, hey, go for a walk, get some vitamin D, get some fresh air, reduce your stress level, and then come back and we're gonna bring this content back to you, even though you already saw it in class, but we're gonna bring it to you in a different way that's actually gonna resonate with you. Because we know that you need to see this content 3 or 4 times in order for you to learn it, or you need to see it a certain way.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's cool.
Huh.
Thank you.
So I know we're way over, but I hope you guys aren't bored. I hope, I mean, you guys all seem like it. Hey, everybody, if you guys have any questions as well, I've been answering questions here. Is there any other questions? Do you wrap up? What would you like?
I think, we like really covered a lot of questions and answers, and you proved us, your solution valuable in some ways for education. Maybe there's still, I believe, something more to work in education to make it better, because we not only deliver the knowledge only by saying or showing it, but also by doing the things. So when you do something and when it becomes experiential, you cannot just track attention from looking at the screen. You need to do practical things. And that's how probably the best learning experience happens, that which really actually comes to your body, and it's like written in your mind and in your body. So this is a kind of like this is really experiential learning. That's what we are focusing, because that way, like looking at the screen and listening, it's important, but that's only one part of the learning process. And I believe for that part, attention is a good way, and that's really good what you are doing, but of course there's much more to be done in education. So thank you, Brian, for
Absolutely.
your delivery of this fantastic lecture.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun engaging with you guys.
And I'm really
Thank you,
thankful for
everybody online.
the whole audience who were participating. I'm just will ask for some persons just to stay, like Pablo, Andres, Vitas, Samantha, if you could stay here for a few minutes, because we would agree with you how to discuss with Brian some some things later. So thank you, everybody, and for your attentive behavior today. You were not distracted as it was seen. Yes, thank you. And the questions really were good.
Thank you for inviting us. It was very nice.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That means a lot to me. Thank
How
you.
you as the educational system, so it's very interesting to hear from the potential.
Thank you, Mariana.
We already have, we've spent 5 years building it. Yeah, so have you ever used Google Translate? Yeah, it's an app. Have you ever used Google Translate? Yeah, so the guy that invented that is my CTO.
You can. While I'm still waiting.
So he's an AI professor. teaching all the PhDs at Berkeley.
Thank you very much for coming.
Mes galėjom palikti bendrą nuotrauką su visais. Galėjom šiltai padaryti. Tai mes tada išeisim į čia, tai nepatogu. Mes truputėlį apsitarsim ir tada galėsim padaryti nuotrauką kur nors tenai.
All in one way. Yeah, for factories
Hmm.
to stand just as doing the same. But using this,
Andrius yra.
isn't it the same? Isn't we teaching all to act in the same way? Everybody have to learn the same thing. It seems like it's personalized, but at the end, through different ways, we're getting everybody to act like this, like the same way.
So this is a platform that people can use even after they finish school, right? So as they continue, what's happening now is when you're working at a corporation, you're expected to continually learn because things are constantly changing. New technologies are coming out. You need to be aware of how things work. Like, for example, I used to be head of sales, VP of sales, CRO at a series of companies called Making Unicorns. The way you sell was constantly changing every quarter because of the way that other salespeople in the industry acted. You constantly had to change the way that you conveyed information, and you had to know what's going on. You had to change your processes and systems. And so the same goes for almost every industry now, where people have to continually learn. If someone just states and says, I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing at work last quarter, I'm going to do the exact same thing this quarter, oftentimes it doesn't. People are either growing or they're going down. And so the folks that are just sitting at home watching TV every night, oftentimes wind up doing less well each and every year, versus the people that continually learn. And so our platform enables them to do that. They continually learn the new things that they need in order to grow. But a big part of it is collaboration.
We hope that we will have an opportunity to work with you.
I would love that. That's why I'm here. I came all the way out here to have a conversation with you guys.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.
Ryan, thank you for the lectures.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a pleasure meeting you. So
Oh,
as a small
thank
gift
you
from
so
us
much.
to you to
I
remember
appreciate
us.
that.
So
That
thank you.
means a lot to me.
Thank you very much.
So I believe we need to talk. Hi, guys. So let's,
So I just received some referrals, you know, that it was really interesting.
great.
Martyna, kuri išbėga dabar, nes čia reikia truputėlį mus gal paorganizuoti myto, o gal ir kaip esmė turi kontaktus. Okay, so